Tonight we are in Leh. Well, not literally, just virtually at the moment. Leh, the capital of Ladakh, perched at over 11,000 feet in the Himalayas. Until 2019, Leh was administratively a part of India-administered Jammu and Kashmir, a territory disputed between Pakistan and India since 1947. But in August 2019, India's parliament unilaterally revoked Article 370 and reorganized the region. Jammu and Kashmir was downgraded to a union territory with a legislature, while Ladakh was carved out as a separate union territory without a legislature. For India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party BJP, this was meant to consolidate sovereignty. For many Ladakhis, it gradually became the root of today's unrest. Yesterday, on September 24, this long simmering discontent erupted into deadly clashes in Leh. Protesters demanding statehood and constitutional safeguards torched a police van and a local BJP office. Police fired tear gas and, according to multiple reports, live ammunition as well. At least 4 people were killed and dozens injured, both civilians and the police. Authorities swiftly imposed curfew-style restrictions across Leh. The immediate spark was tragic. 2 hunger strikers fainted during the march. Climate activist Sonam Wangchuk, whose 15-day fast had become the movement's moral compass, ended his strike to prevent further bloodshed. New Delhi says it is actively engaged with Ladakh's leadership through a high-powered committee under the Home Ministry, with the next round of talks set for October 6, 2025. That meeting will include representatives from LAB and KDA, the 2 civil coalitions coordinating the agitation. The Leh apex body, largely Buddhist majority Leh civil society leaders, and the Kargil Democratic Alliance, umbrella of parties and civil society leaders from Muslim majority Kargil, coordinate joint platforms and protest programs for constitutional safeguards and statehood. A March 2024 shutdown in Kargil underlined how these coalitions work in tandem across the district divide. So, what do the protesters actually want? As mentioned earlier, the protesters are represented by the Leh apex body LAB and Kargil Democratic Alliance KDA, which has 4 core demands. Number 1, full statehood for Ladakh. Number 2, extension of the 6th schedule of India's constitution, which grants tribal areas elected autonomous district councils with authority over land, forests, and customs. 6th schedule, a set of constitutional provisions, Article 244(2) and 275(1) that empower autonomous district councils with legislative and executive powers to make and implement laws to protect land, culture, and customary law for tribal areas in parts of India's northeast, currently applicable in parts of Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Tripura. Extending it to Ladakh would require Parliament's approval and a political decision by the Union government. Number 3, creation of a Ladakh Public Service Commission to ensure local recruitment. And number 4, enhanced political representation, including parliamentary seats. Now, these demands cannot be separated from the 2019 decision. Initially, many Ladakhis welcomed separation from Kashmir, believing it would free them from what they saw as political neglect by the Kashmir-centric administration in Srinagar. Ladakh's Buddhist minority in particular thought direct access to New Delhi would safeguard their interests. But by 2021, disenchantment grew. People realized that without a legislature or constitutional protections, Ladakh was exposed. Outside corporations could buy land, outsiders could take jobs, and local voices were sidelined. The first major protest erupted in 2021, laying the foundation for today's larger mobilization. But this cannot be divorced from the historical context. A little bit of that. Promise I will not go into the details of the history lesson, but a little bit of historical context would not hurt. How Ladakh became part of Kashmir. To understand Ladakh's present, we must revisit history. Promise again, not the the deeply immersed historical lesson, but a little bit of it. In the mid-19th century, Ladakh was annexed by the Dogra rulers of Jammu and incorporated into the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir under British suzerainty. When India was partitioned in 1947, the Dogra ruler acceded to India, making Ladakh part of the new Indian Union, but always as a sub-region of Jammu and Kashmir. Many Ladakhis felt marginalized within that framework. Their vast landmass and fragile ecology overshadowed by the valley's political dominance. This explains why in 2019 some Ladakhis welcomed separation. But the absence of meaningful autonomy quickly reversed that kind of optimism. Why did India make Ladakh a union territory without a legislature? I mean, Kashmir was made a union territory with a legislature, some kind of representation. But Ladakh, you know, totally was left totally without any kind of representation, no legislature. This distinction is crucial. Jammu and Kashmir retained a legislature, even if with curtailed powers. It doesn't have any powers. It remains a union territory under the purview of Lok Sabha and the federal government, union government, of course. Ladakh was denied this. Now, there are different points of view regarding this. In India, different experts points to uh, two main reasons. Number one, strategic control. Ladakh borders both China in Aksai and Pakistan in Gilgit, Baltistan, making it India's most sensitive frontier. By keeping it directly under the Central Home Ministry, New Delhi ensured no local legislature could complicate the border policy or land decisions. And number two was demographic management. Ladakh's population is barely 300,000. Officials argued a legislature for such a small region was impractical. But critics see this as paternalistic and dismissive of federal equality. In short, the government sought tighter control in the name of security, but as constitutional experts like A.G. Noorani and others noted, uh, uh, may he rest in peace, along with A.G. Noorani, others also noted in their commentary at that time, such arrangements weaken democracy at the periphery, sowing seeds of resentment. And that's exactly what happened. Then there was another aspect, why the job quotas fell short. In June 2025, Ladakh's administration notified new rules. 85% of government jobs reserved for locals. While significant, this was seen as a concession without empowerment. For Ladakhis, the real issue was not just jobs, but lands and identity as well. Without six schedule protections, they feared large-scale land purchases and demographic shifts. Fears sharpened by the example of other Himalayan regions where outside migration altered local culture. The quota rules, therefore, felt like band-aids on deeper wounds. Now, why the sixth schedule matters? As explained earlier, the sixth schedule is symbolic and practical. Symbolic because it would acknowledge Ladakh's tribal and ecological uniqueness, placing it in the same category as protected regions of the Northeast. Practical because it would give Ladakhi councils constitutional powers over land, forests, and resources. In an environment where glaciers are receding and pastoral livelihoods are fragile, this autonomy is existential. Local leaders say, without sixth schedule, we are not masters of our land. Now, all of these factors are important, but then there is, I mentioned in passing, there is a security overlay, which is also very important to consider. And since 2020, let's talk about this. No discussion of Ladakh is complete without the India-China dimension. In June 2020, Indian and Chinese troops clashed in Galwan Valley, killing at least 20 Indian soldiers and an undisclosed number of Chinese. Since then, both sides have created buffer zones. No petrol areas, meant to avoid, obviously, conflict. But these zones cut off Ladakh's nomads from traditional grazing areas and fishermen from parts of Pangong Tso Lake. Independent reporting by Al Jazeera and others documented how herders lost livelihoods because land they once accessed is now militarized or restricted. Thus, border diplomacy between Delhi and Beijing directly impacted civilian lives. Now, come back to September 24. A lay rally began as peaceful. The protesters carried placards reading "Statehood now" and "Sixth schedule is our right," and slogans like this. The mood turned tense when news spread that two hunger strikers had collapsed. Crowds swelled, the anger rose, and some protesters set fire to a police van and the BJP district office. Police responded with batons, tear gas, and eventually live fire. By nightfall, 4 lay dead, dozens injured. The administration imposed prohibitory orders, internet curbs, and accused outside forces of fueling unrest. Independent media, which is very rare in India, well, it is there, it is still there. So the sections of media which can be considered independent and civil society, they counter that official narrative. No evidence has emerged of foreign instigation. Local journalists confirm this was a homegrown movement led by respected community figures. Wangchuk himself urged peace and broke his fast to prevent escalation. As of late September, officials continue to hint at foreign hands, including China, Bangladesh, Nepal, but these remain unsubstantiated claims, echoed largely in pro-government media. No formal evidence has been presented so far. Now, about the politics of negotiations, New Delhi insists it is engaging sincerely through a high-powered committee. Talks are now scheduled for October 6, but Ladakhi leaders fear yet another round of tokenism. Analysts in Indian outlets such as The Hindu and Indian Express note that Ladakh was long framed as the success story of the 2019 reorganization, India's unilateral action of revoking Article 370. No insurgency, no cross-border militancy, and relatively quiet streets compared to Kashmir. The September 24 violence shatters that narrative. Experts like Happymon Jacob argue that treating Ladakh merely as a security buffer while denying political agency is a recipe for unrest. Now, what is the central dilemma? What is the central dilemma? What is this? What is the central dilemma? Can New Delhi reconcile its strategic interests with Ladakhis' democratic aspirations? That is the question. Now come to the geopolitical stakes. China, Aksai Chin, G219. Whatever Indian government says, at the heart of the geopolitics lies Aksai Chin, a 38,000 square kilometer plateau controlled by China but claimed by India. Through it runs the G219 highway, China's strategic road linking Xinjiang and Tibet. For Beijing, Aksai Chin is non-negotiable. It is the artery connecting two sensitive provinces. For India, its loss in 1962 and continued Chinese consolidation there is a strategic wound, open wound, as India thinks it. Every Ladakh protest, therefore, unfolds under the shadow of this high-stakes frontier. And then there are buffer zones and livelihoods. Since 2020, multiple disengagement agreements created buffer zones at Galwan and Gogra, Pangong Tso, and Dispang. For India, this reduced chances of violent clashes. For locals, it meant losing access to pastures, lakes, mountains. Reports detail how nomadic Changpa herders had to sell livestock due to grazing bans in former pasture lands, now frozen as no petrol zones. Security solutions have thus become livelihood crises, quite serious ones. And when talking about geopolitics, how is it possible not to talk about Pakistan? Pakistan watches closely. Ladakh borders Gilgit-Baltistan and the Siachen glacier, zones deeply tied to the broader Kashmir dispute. Islamabad's official statements fold Ladakh unrest into claims of Indian high-handedness. With China as Pakistan's all-weather partner, Ladakh becomes part of the China-Pakistan strategic entente, which includes CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, just west of Ladakh. While Pakistan's influence inside Ladakh is minimal, its diplomatic use of the issue is maximal. And now, how can we forget the US? How can we forget Quad? And how can we forget the recent strain between India and USA? For the United States and its Quad partners, Ladakh is a case study in China's assertiveness. Since 2020, US-India defense cooperation, logistic agreements, intelligence sharing, joint exercises, all of that has escalated, often justified by the China threat at Ladakh. Historically, the Quad, revived in 2017, was maritime focused, but Ladakh ties India's continental security into Indo-Pacific strategy. Yet, US-India ties are not without strain. Trade disputes, Washington's criticism of India's democratic backsliding, and differences over Russia complicates the relationship. And President Trump's repeated assertions that he has played a role in the ceasefire between Pakistan and India when India attacked Pakistan in May 2025. Still, most analysts agree China's presence in Ladakh locks India more firmly into the US orbit, whether reluctantly or enthusiastically. Let's see what happens um, in the coming days. And we can't forget about climate security and eco-federalism. Ladakh is warming faster than the global average. Studies show rapid retreat of glaciers like Parachek and Suru, threatening water supplies downstream into both India and Pakistan. Melting glaciers increase risks of glacial lake outburst floods. Local activists argue that only empowered local governance and eco-federalism can safeguard fragile ecosystems. Without constitutional autonomy, they fear Ladakh will be opened to extractive projects that erode both environment and culture. So, all of that, if we look at the timeline once again, we can just join the dots, and in a nutshell, we can understand what exactly is happening. So the timeline, oh, it doesn't start from 2019, but let's, for the sake of our this understanding this current unrest, let's start it from 2019. August 5, India revokes Article 370. Ladakh becomes a union territory, UT, without a legislature. Initial cheers in Leh, particularly among Buddhists, soon turns to anxiety. Comes 2020, Galwan clashes between China and India. Ladakh becomes a front line in the India-China standoff, and there is violence without firearms, but there is violence. Then comes 2021. First united protest by LAB and KDA demanding statehood and sixth schedule. Fast forward to March 2024. Kargil shutdown underscores unity across districts. There was a shutdown across Kargil. And that signified there was unity across the districts. No district was standalone in this resistance. And then comes June 2025. Domicile and 85% job reservation rules notified, but protesters say they fall short. They are cosmetic. And then September 2025, hunger strikes, mass rallies. Unfortunately, September 24 turns violent with deaths and injuries. About to come is October 6, 2025. Next round of talks scheduled between Ladakhi leaders and the Home Ministry. That's to watch. Number one, October 6 talks. Will New Delhi commit to constitutional safeguards or rely on administrative palliatives? Number two, accountability for September 24. Independent inquiry into killings and whether force was excessive. Will that inquiry be constituted? That has to be watched. Number three, China talks. Any shift in buffer zone arrangements will directly impact livelihoods in Ladakh. Number four, Quad geopolitics. Will the US-India partnership sharpen further around the Ladakh frontier, especially amid US election year politics, midterm election year politics? Number five, climate shocks, any major glacier collapse or flood could reframe Ladakh not just as a security hotspot, but as an ecological emergency zone. So, our assessment, uh, you know, at its heart, Ladakh is a test of democracy at the periphery. By centralizing control in the name of security, New Delhi risks alienating the very communities whose consent it needs. Job quotas without real political empowerment are insufficient. The six schedule safeguards are not merely symbolic, they are lifelines for a fragile, tribal, high altitude society. The violence of September 24 illustrates the dangers of treating political demands as security threats. True security in Ladakh lies not in the curfews and quotas, but in trust, consent, and empowerment. Eco-federalism uh, is important, giving Ladakhis constitutional authority over land and water. It is not luxury, it is a national security imperative. Only the governments have to think about it that way. The Ladakh protests remind us that democracy's strength is tested not in capitals but in the frontiers. Here, where glaciers melt, borders burn, and cultures struggle to survive, people demand voice, dignity, and control over their destiny. For India, the choice is clear: constitutionalize Ladakh's autonomy or risk a cycle where alienation fuels unrest and unrest justifies more central control. For the world, Ladakh is not just a remote plateau. It is a mirror of how modern states balance sovereignty with democracy and how high altitude frontiers shape the geopolitics of Asia. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to New Wave Global and share our episodes with your friends and family. Till next time, have a good one.